Hello and welcome to Ankara, the capital of Turkey, for an exclusive interview with the President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Mr. President, thank you very much for hosting us.
Thank you for being here. I'm glad to see you again.
Mr. President, in a couple of days you will be attending the G20 meeting in Hamburg in Germany. There have been a few controversies about you going there. We've seen German authorities said they didn't want you to address the Turks in Germany. Your bodyguards are not welcome. Do you feel that you're really welcome in Germany for that summit?
All right, I'll be quite frank with you. I believe this approach of theirs, the German approach, has been quite unfortunate, in my opinion, at least when it comes to international politics, when it comes to individual liberties, or the progress of democracy. After all, this is a president of the Turkish Republic who has garnered 52% of the vote in the presidential elections, and you're preventing him or me from getting together with his compatriots in Germany and from just having a chat with them. You're blocking that, you're preventing that from happening. It just goes to show how liberal the German democracy is. And it didn't just end there. Right outside of the Chancery building, there were pictures of a large placard on which you had a car, and it read, "If you want to win this car, kill one of these three dictators." And the dictators were Erdogan, Putin, and King Salman of Saudi Arabia. So all of this happened. It happened in the streets of Germany, and the German police was standing right there. It was happening before their very eyes. This was an incitement to commit a crime, to violence, and unfortunately, German authorities didn't say a thing about it.
Would you reconsider going to the G20 because of those offenses that you're describing, or are you definitely going nevertheless?
Well, despite everything, I will be going to the G20. And obviously, at the G20, I will be mentioning this issue because the G20 is meant to cover all sorts of issues. The G20 accounts for 80% of the world's economy, and it has many things on its agenda. It has the fight against terrorism. It has the refugees issues. And before such a G20 summit, it is saddening to see a campaign such as this in Germany. It so happens that Turkey has over 3 million of its citizens living in Germany, including 1.5 million who are dual citizens, German and Turkish citizens. And so German authorities should be much more careful in terms of their statements.
Do you regret making remarks describing Germany and the Netherlands as having Nazi-like behaviors in the campaign for the referendum? Do you think you went too far, and do you agree that this was maybe a mistake of yours?
I do not regret it at all, because this behavior is one that corresponds to the very definition of Nazism. It is an expression of fascism.
Really?
And indeed, the word fascist is the only one you can fall back on when describing such behavior. It's something that you only see in fascist-type structures. It is a fascist-type kind of behavior. And this fascist-type behavior should not normally have been authorized by German authorities. The same way that we combat terrorism, we should also prevent such behaviors from happening, as they are vestiges of fascism or Nazism. German authorities should not have allowed those things. If it had happened in my country, I would not have authorized them. What is fascism? What is Nazism? Of course, the question of the definition is important. It's also important to see who is responsible for these actions and are the authorities acting against them. That is the important issue. That's what I'm saying. And I'm not accusing German authorities of being fascist. I am only saying that it's not okay to authorize such behaviors. And certainly we want to have rules against such actions.
The criticism in Germany and more broadly in Europe and the tensions with the European Union are due essentially to the fact that since last year's coup, exactly a year ago, there has been what has been described in the West as a crackdown here in Turkey. Over 50,000 people have been jailed, over 4,000 prosecutors and judges dismissed. And in the eyes of many people in the West, this is not legitimate. This is a witch hunt, and this is why they feel Turkey is drifting away from Europe and from democracy.
All right, what we've seen in this country was an attempted coup against the state. And during this attempted coup, nobody was talking about the fact that 250 citizens of ours were killed and 2,193 of my citizens were injured. Lots of places were attacked, destroyed, or bombed with the F-16s fighter jets of the state, with the attack helicopters and tanks and artillery of the state, which were used against our own people, and nobody condemned it. On that very night, nobody condemned it. On the contrary, it seemed that the West preferred the attempted coup over democracy itself.
Really? You think this is what they would have liked to see happen?
Well, how else can you account for the fact that they kept silent and did not condemn what was happening? It seems that some people welcomed that attempted coup. At least that's how many in Turkey felt. That was their perception of what was going on. For example, the first words of condemnation came 1 week, a full week after the coup had happened. We would have liked such condemnation to happen on the very night that the attempted coup occurred, because all of the coup happened in a window of 24 hours, and the reason that it only took 24 hours to quell that coup was the fact that Turkish people took to the streets upon my call, and that made it possible to end it all in just 24 hours. It was the Turkish people who prevented this attempted coup in an act of glorious resistance.
But what about the crackdown? There is this impression that the coup served as an excuse to crack down on the opposition, on media, on independent voices, and that therefore this is the problem that's we have in the West with Turkey right now.
All right, let's get our facts straight. The West is always coming up with excuses, and I think the West should stop doing that. We need the West to be more honest about what's going on, because if such an attempted coup had happened in a Western country, well, Western countries are saying we have the right judicial procedures for that. But Western countries at the same time are hosting terrorists in their own countries, and they give them the resources they need. So let's stop making excuses. For example, I have submitted 4,500 files to Germany, and I have not seen any concrete outcome from that. In fact, part of the German state right now are seeing all of these people coming into Germany and are coming up with very interesting observations showing just how right our approach has been. And so those are issues that I will be raising at every opportunity, and I will use every occasion or platform to do that. Whether they accept it or not is another story, but we will be telling the truth to the people who need to hear the truth on every occasion. At every opportunity, I have to do that, and the G20 will be an opportunity for me to do that.
Just a last question before we get to regional affairs. There is a so-called justice march happening right now, called by the main opposition party, the Republican People's Party, from Ankara to Istanbul after an MP was accused of espionage. There's been criticism from the government officials about this. First of all, will you allow this march to proceed to the end? And isn't this a peaceful way of demonstrating and not siding with terrorists like the accusations we've heard?
Well, let me be very clear about this. This has been touted as a justice march, but what it actually is a march of ignorance. On the 15th of July, when the coup was attempted, this individual, who is now organizing this so-called justice march, on that very night, whilst the people of Turkey was marching in the streets, fled from the airport. He fled from the airport and sought refuge in a nearby town, the nearby town of Bakırköy, whose city hall is sympathetic to his political party, and found a refuge in the house of the mayor. This man is not after justice.
Will you allow the march to proceed? I understand that you disagree, but will you allow them to peacefully demonstrate and continue their march to the end?
Up until now, the march has proceeded safely because we, the Turkish government, have put in place a number of security arrangements. We did that. We made sure no incident happened, and so the march has proceeded safely. And if an incident happens, then we'll have to intervene.
Okay, I want to get to regional issues, the crisis with Qatar. You've sided with Qatar against Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt. They've made a list of 13 demands. Do you think a solution is still possible, or do you fear that there could be an escalation, more sanctions, or even a military confrontation?
All right, we don't want a second crisis region to emerge. We already have Syria and Iraq, two countries where there already is a major crisis going on. And so certainly we don't want a similar crisis to emerge in the Gulf region. But regarding your question, Saudi Arabia happens to be the most powerful country in the Gulf region, and I've said so in each and every one of my statements. The King of Saudi Arabia, as the eldest head of state in the region and as the head of the most powerful economy of the region, should do everything to avoid this kind of crisis from emerging in his region. That's what we're asking him to do. There are sanctions which are subdivided into 13 items, and if those 13 items were implemented, they would strip Qatar of its sovereignty.
So it's unacceptable.
No, that can never be accepted. There are items under those sanctions that are tantamount to saying, I don't recognize you as a state, and so you should give up all of your prerogatives as a sovereign state. That's what these items mean, and we cannot accept that. In this context, Turkey, for example, has a defense agreement with Qatar that goes back to 2014. Now, this agreement included a provision to the effect that Turkey would establish a base in Qatar. That was requested by Qatar, and Turkey gladly agreed. Now, that same year, it turns out that I offered Saudi Arabia the same thing, and I said, if you wish, we could also establish a base in Saudi Arabia. And back in 2014, what they told me was that they would give it some thought. In the meantime, of course, we started working with Qatar. We started working in Qatar because we had that agreement, and ongoing efforts to establish the base go back to 2014. And now we're being told the Turkish base needs to go.
Would you be ready to do this as a compromise gesture?
Well, unless Qatar requests it, we will not do it. We will never do it.
Have they indicated that this could be a possibility?
So why aren't they asking the same of CENTCOM? The U.S. has a base there. The French have a base there. So why are they not getting the same request? Why is this only being requested of Turkey? Turkey, to start with, wants to remain loyal to its agreement with Qatar, and Turkey will just stay true to its word.
But if Qatar was to ask you, you would consider this as a gesture to solve the crisis, correct?
Well, if such a request comes from Qatar, obviously we wouldn't remain in a place where we're not wanted.
But do you think, from your discussions with regional leaders, world leaders, that there will be a solution to this crisis soon?
At the moment, the West isn't really supporting the set of demands made by Gulf countries, and neither do we, because all of this is extremely unjust. It's out of the question whether it's food or medication or clothing. All of these sanctions are just things that cannot be accepted. Neither can we accept that Qatar is a terror-promoting state. That's out of the question. Over my 15 years as prime minister and then as president, I've always known Qatar as a country that combats terrorism. So it's wrong for people to go around spreading inexact information or misinformation.
But are you optimistic that there will be a solution?
I never lose hope or lose my optimism.
I want to get to Syria. There are rumors that Turkey might again send troops into northern Syria. We know that over there, the U.S. supported People's Protection Units, a Syrian Kurdish force, which Turkey claims is linked to the PKK party, is taking a major part in the assault on Raqqa, the so-called capital of Daesh in Syria. Is it true that Turkey stands ready to intervene because it considers that this is a terrorist organization and it needs to be dealt with?
Well, first of all, I want to make this one thing very clear. The terrorist groups that the U.S. is cooperating with are a constant threat to us, and they are the PYD or the YPG. And it is something that I've also explained to President Trump. Now, out of these two, the former is the political branch of the PKK, and the latter is the terrorist branch. But they are both terrorist organizations at the end of the day. And the fact that they are linked to the PKK is something that is documented by a lot of evidence, but unfortunately, we have not been able to convince our American friends of that.
They're giving them heavy weapons, by the way. I mean, clearly they don't listen to you, they do the opposite.
Well, that intervention we could have done together, but you're right, they provided them with everything. And right now, as you know, in the north of Syria, the U.S. has 7 air bases out of a total of 17 bases. So in the region, you have heavy weaponry, you have light weaponry, everything is out there, everything is available. And to whom are they providing these weapons? To PYD. And they've been telling us that they would be getting these weapons back later on.
You don't believe them, obviously.
Well, let's just not fool ourselves. This is just not possible. At the moment, these weapons have already been provided to PYD, and they will remain in the hands of the PYD. Why would it be otherwise? When Obama was president, some of the weapons they provided went to Daesh. And today you will find American weapons in the hands of Daesh. We've seen that. We've experienced that. As for the assault on Raqqa, well, we could have done it jointly, so why didn't they work with us? If they were sincere about it, then we could have done it together. And today, in that region, it is our forces that have dealt the biggest blows to Daesh, and we've been doing it until now and will continue to do it. And our fight is not over. Our fight against Daesh is not over by any measure. Domestically, we keep fighting against Daesh, and outside of Turkey as well, and we will continue that fight. Right now, together with Russia, we've created a de-escalation zone.
In Idlib.
And in this de-escalation area, we have joint operations, including in Aleppo.
It's going to happen.
Currently, Turkey, Russia, and Iran have been working together with the Astana consultations process, which actually serves this purpose. It has paved the way. It's the initial step, if you will. And going from Astana to Geneva, we're going to continue in the same direction. And still on this topic, last week I had a phone conversation with President Putin, who also went on to send his Russian Minister of National Defense to Turkey, and we had a bilateral meeting where we worked based on military maps. And during the G20, I will also be mentioning these issues with Mr. Putin. We will have further talks and try and determine what we need to do based on the preparatory work done by my advisors.
Right. So you're optimistic that this de-escalation zone will be happening, actually, but you didn't answer my question. Are you ready to send military troops to deal with this group you call terrorists that the U.S. supports militarily? Yes or no?
At the moment, if there is any threat directed against Turkey, of course, our troops will be ready to conduct any operation with the Free Syrian Army.
You're cooperating, as you just described, with Russia, but also with Iran, the key allies of Bashar al-Assad. A number of Western leaders, including the new French president, Emmanuel Macron, have recently shifted and saying we should not make Assad's departure a prerequisite. I imagine you must agree.
I think that's not the right approach.
Just very last question, that's all we have time for. In Iraq, in Kurdistan, a referendum on independence has been announced by President Masoud Barzani for September 25th. I recently interviewed him, and he told me that Turkey is opposed not to the referendum, but to the timing of the referendum. So can you clarify exactly what your views are on this?
Well, on this referendum in Erbil, I do not happen to think that it's the right thing to do. And when it comes to this, we've actually shared our opinion with a local government in northern Iraq, because the local administration in northern Iraq will regret this if they go ahead with it. Barzani and the local administration in northern Iraq aren't ready for this at this point, and further, this will undermine the territorial integrity of Iraq, and we certainly want to preserve the territorial integrity of Iraq. So that's what we're saying. If you take this step, it's as though you're saying we're going to divide this country. That's basically what is going to happen, and there might be further divisions down the line.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for watching this exclusive from the presidential palace here in Ankara, Turkey.